So welcome everyone to our fourth and final gubernatorial power lunch prior to the big election next Tuesday. Folks who are unenrolled or enrolled in the Democratic Party can vote in the Democratic Party primary. We did not have enough Republicans responding to our invitation, unfortunately, to make a power lunch series for those choosing to vote in the Republican primary. But again, welcome. And my name is Seth Berry. I'm fortunate to be the executive director of Our Power. Our Power has been around since 2020, advocating for lower electricity costs, for greater local control, and for better service and reliability. We are very privileged to be joined today by Dr. Nirav Shah, and we're going to get a chance to hear his thoughts about energy, his plans, his priorities, his principles, and then a chance for you to ask your questions, whether in the chat or using the Q&A function, or even if you're willing, raise your hand and I'll bring you in to ask your question live. This crowd, I think, is pretty well versed at this point. A lot of returning members from our previous power lunches. So thanks everyone for joining us for this one. Dr. Nirav Shah first came on the scene for many of us in the the first days of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was a state legislator then and was privileged to join him for many briefings that he gave to legislators. And we all benefited from his briefings at that time and really looked to him as a voice of reason. He then served as the deputy director of the U.S. CDC, Centers for Disease Control, of course, and is now a Colby College professor. He is a candidate, one of the candidates that you can rank on the ballot, the Democratic ballot for governor next week. So with that brief introduction, Dr. Shah, I want to turn it over to you to speak about your plans and priorities for energy briefly, and then we will go to Q&A. So thanks again for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Seth, for the opportunity. And thanks to the 17, 20 people, 18 people who are on. I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect with you, hear your questions and ideas. So I'm very much looking forward to this. As I mentioned, to Seth, I had hoped to be from computer. My desk had to be in transit, but I'm looking forward to the discussion. So I'm going to try to set the table briefly, but I feel like in sessions of this nature, the real richness is in the Q&A. So I'm hoping we can get to that as quickly as possible. So I'll be expeditious. I think in no particular order, I want to touch on three areas at the intersection of climate change, energy supply, and affordability. Number one is how Maine continues on the pathway toward an ever greater percentage of our electricity portfolio coming from renewable sources. And there's two things I want to observe. One, Maine has already led the way, but there's a lot more that we can be doing. Number two, some of the roadblocks that have been attempted to be erected by the Trump administration may slow things down a bit. But many of the folks with whom I've had the pleasure of speaking remain optimistic about Maine's chances and opportunities to proceed with things like offshore wind, onshore wind, even greater expansions of solar energy, as well as newer emerging technologies, or maybe not so new, but opportunities in geothermal and such. So what my observation has been that much of what the Trump administration has endeavored to do to slow down particularly offshore wind, has often been found to be unlawful. I note, for example, that this is a good reason for optimism. I think it's also a good reason why the next governor is going to have to employ not just typical policy making, but also look to the courts so that we can remove these barriers and continue on that transition. In big picture terms, one of my goals as governor would be to continue with the decoupling of our energy sources from the fossil fuel grid. The more we can do so, the more we will be able to take advantage of energy independence here and harness zero margin or close to zero marginal cost energy. So again, my goal as governor will be to continue with decoupling of our energy portfolio off of the fossil fuel grid or the fossil fuel sources. Number two is, again, in no particular order, is modernizing and hardening and fortifying our grid. Seth, you noted sort of the reliability issues that have plagued our lowest in the league tables there. Some of the responses that I have received from utility companies are frankly unsatisfying. They cite things like an older than average grid. There are a lot of grids that are about the same age but perform better. They cite the high tree cover. New Hampshire has a lot of trees. They cite cold weather, a lot of cold weather in North Dakota. So I have found those answers unsatisfying, and thus an imperative to take a stronger look at hardening our grid and making sure that the utilities are doing their fair share. And then the final piece that I'll just comment on is around affordability here. I want to acknowledge that when I've spoken with folks, the number one concern that comes up to me is what can be done to lower electricity costs. I think you know far better than I. It's not as if there's a magic wand where costs can just be lowered. But what I think the next governor can do is take firmer steps to hold CMP and other utilities directly accountable for things like reliability, to reduce the ROI that they get, and even think about opportunities for performance-based regulation. Now, I know that can be fraught, and it's a lot easier said than done, but if there's anywhere that can move toward performance-based regulation rather than capex-based regulation, it would be more highly regulated, so on and so forth. So those are a couple of issues that are mine for me. I'm eager to take your questions and learn from you all about the expertise, from your expertise. Seth, apologies. I don't want to interrupt you while you're on a roll, but I can't hear you. But perhaps someone else wants to weigh in.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear, Seth.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I was actually remarking that your feed is a little bit it's just a little bit hard. It's a little choppy coming in the audio feed. So I just took you off video for a moment so we can hear you better. And now that I'm unmuted, you can hear me as well. The first question, Nirav, is from Becky Bardovic. She asks, how would you deal with the push that's currently underway coming from private equity investors towards small-scale nuclear without any solution on the horizon for waste or any track record of reduced costs?
Yeah, great, good. Interestingly, thanks, Becky. I recently just had a meeting on this topic or something very close to it, and let me try to provide a couple of bottom lines for me. Number one is private equity has no business in this market whatsoever. So right off the gate, this should be something that should be prohibited. Their interests are in a robust bottom line, loading up companies with debt, selling it off a couple of years later. They are not looking for long-term sustainable energy supplies. So that's and I lob that criticism not just with respect to SMRs, but perhaps other energy investments that they would want to make, to say nothing of housing and healthcare, where private equity is, again, not the pathway for capital. In addition to that, you correctly note, Becky, the absence of solutions for waste. I think that is one reason in the briefing that I was in, where it's the person who was briefing noted that there was a lot of enthusiasm for SMRs 2 years ago, but because these technical solutions, there's been no solution to them. It appears as if the enthusiasm for SMRs has really cratered. But more importantly, I think Maine should not be seduced by the promise of things of this nature. We should really recognize that these are right now more science fiction than science, and not get seduced by them or the promises there. And again, I think a ban on private equity ownership of assets of this nature, capital assets, whether that is hospitals, whether that is electricity, et cetera, is entirely overdue.
Great. Okay, I think we're past the audio issues, and glad to have you back on screen. Thank you. We have a question from Bill Dunn, one of our board members, lifetime career of service in utility and energy consulting all around the world, in fact, in dozens of countries. And Bill says the PUC in Maine has totally failed Maine ratepayers. Year after year, Maine continues to have the worst or near worst reliability in the country. You've alluded to this, and also the worst customer satisfaction. I'll add to that the report just out yesterday that our lower income folks have the highest energy burden in the country based on high electricity costs in large part. So what would you do, Dr. Shah, to force the PUC to do their job or redefine their job and serve Maine ratepayers and not the foreign owners of CMP and Versant?
Good, and I will add to that that litany of, or that parade of horribles. As I understand, the fifth highest electricity rates in the country as well. There is not a measure on which Maine seems to be excelling, although maybe perhaps our percentage of renewables is a bit of a bright spot relative to others. But on reliability, on uptime, on rates, and on equity, we are at the bottom. I think PUC is part of the issue. I don't want to foist every iota of blame upon them. That said, they are, and the public advocate in particular really needs to be strengthened. So for me, it comes down to a couple of things. Some of it is personnel and staffing, making sure that the PUC itself is empowered and has the right direction to be an actual utilities regulator, rather than just someone who's always trying to placate one side, in this case, the utilities. The other is making sure the public advocate has the resources that they need to, again, advocate for all of us as the ratepayers. But I also think it's high time to look at the ancient business model that has underlied the utility industry. My understanding is that their business model is about as old as the invention of electricity itself. That is to say that the more they spend, the more they make. Boy, wouldn't all of us love to be in a job where the more of the boss's money we spend, the more money and reimbursement that we get? And again, my understanding is that performance-based regulation is an option. I'm aware of the difficulties of it, but my read is that those difficulties are either things that can be resolved through careful regulatory approaches, or alternatively ones that are just figments that are raised by the utility industry. And so I find some of those objections to changing away from a CapEx model to a PBR model to be a little like, yeah, of course the incumbent doesn't like change. Shocker. But let's not let that be the barrier to progress.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna go to an observation by Ken Colburn. Ken is on the board of the Efficiency Maine Trust and has a career in regulating and in working with cooperative utilities. Ken notes that utilities get paid for CapEx, so no surprise they see building stuff as the answer to everything, especially meeting peak loads. And just to editorialize briefly here, there are some important Supreme Court cases that the utilities will point to every time as the sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of regulators. If you don't give us either a very good rate of return or a performance-based regulation system that we like, that we can profit even more from, then we'll sue you and maybe we'll win. This happened in Connecticut recently, where, and that's a little bit of a nuanced situation, but I think the lesson from Connecticut, Dr. Shah, might be will you, as governor, number one, choose regulators who will regulate with vigor and on behalf of the people, with affordability as their North Star, number one. And then will you stand by them and make sure that the utilities aren't able to take them down and take them out the way that CMP's owner was able to do in Connecticut?
Good. Excellent question, Seth. I'm going to start with those and then back into some of the legal framework here. So as to both of your questions, the answer is an unequivocal yes, both in terms of regulating, as you say, with vigor, and then standing by or having the backs of the regulators as this heats up in the courts. And because this is a campaign event, I am duty bound to advocate for myself here just a wee bit. As for folks' awareness, although I went to medical school, and that is the context in which many folks first got to know me, I am an attorney first and foremost. Practiced law for about 10 years. A lot of the area that I practiced in was in regulated industries, often handling cases that were on appeal. And so representing a variety of regulated industries, sometimes in antitrust matters, which comes up a lot in the utility space, et cetera. I do not mean to hold myself out as expert in electricity utilities. I am not, to be very clear. But when it comes to the intersection of regulation and policy, that's at the risk of sounding too much like a technocrat, that's my jam. That is what I am about. And so, again, not holding myself out as an expert. I am a neophyte with a lot more to learn, and that's why these conversations are helpful. All that said, as to the legal backdrop, as you, Seth, being an attorney, and so many others know, every case is distinguishable. First of all, statutory frameworks can and often change. Much of this is a creature of state law, although I know there's a federal apparatus. And more importantly, if there is anywhere that can be a case study for appropriate PBR in Maine or in the United States, Maine stands a good chance. Full disclosure, I have not read the opinions in the Connecticut matter, so I don't want to speak more than what I know. But you've just added to my nighttime reading list, Seth. In fact, I don't want to ask you to help, but if you happen to have some of those opinions, lawyer to lawyer, I would love to read them.
Not a lawyer, but I do play with.
And I get the argument they're making. It comes up and
yeah.
Oh, and I get the argument they're making. Look, in regulated industry work, the utilities make the same set of legal arguments, whether it's healthcare, whether it's what have you, whether it's telecom, where I've worked a lot in, I suspect the same as energy. It's the same regulatory moves. We need a guarantee. If you don't do that, we will leave. It's violation of the pact between, it's the same arguments, but time for progress.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Can you hear me? I'm going to ask that David Gibson introduce himself, and David, state your question as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. It's great to hear from you. I spent hours listening to your recommendations throughout the pandemic, so you're definitely a familiar voice. I am the Director of Energy at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor. My primary role is transitioning our campus off of fossil fuels by 2030. And in the last 5 years, we've gotten more than halfway there, cutting our heating oil and propane consumption roughly in half. Driving around Maine this winter, more than half the homes I saw had ice dams, and many small businesses too. This means that heat is leaking through the attic to melt the snow off the roof, which refreezes when it gets over the eaves, often causing damage to the home in addition to costing thousands for wasted heat. The Weatherization Assistance Program and Efficiency Maine programs combined have insulated fewer than 4,000 homes per year, meaning it will take more than 100 years to seal and insulate all the homes and small businesses that need it. What will you do to accelerate insulation efforts? And as governor, would you consider training and mobilizing the National Guard to insulate low-income homes, treating this as the emergency that it is for low-income families? Thank you.
Interesting questions, David. Very, very interesting. Love that. Let me first start with just sort of at a conceptual or policy level. One of my approaches or my my thinking is that the cheapest kilowatt hour of energy is the kilowatt hour that is not used. And so the more that we can improve insulation, not only are there very palpable climate and environmental benefits, but it's also a win for ratepayers because, again, the cheapest energy, the cheapest kilowatt hour is that which is not used in the first instance. And more importantly, David, I think Efficiency Maine has established an incredible track record, as you noted, and kudos to you all at COA for grabbing that mantle and advancing it. My approach here is to double down on programs or triple down on programs already demonstrated their worth. And so as I've chatted with folks at Efficiency Maine and elsewhere, one of the things that they are looking for is, of course, additional funding, which I'm committed to, as well as additional personnel and staff to help speed things up so they can do even more. When I meet with a group where things are working, like whether it's this or the eviction prevention program, what have you, one of my first questions is, you're already here, but I want you to be here. What can the next governor do to help you get you where you want to go? And those are some of the reflections I've heard and read in Efficiency Maine's reports. So bottom line there, I would like to increase the available funding they've got and try to build them out more so that they can continue. To your point and your question about the National Guard, having worked in government for a while and having had to use the National Guard during the pandemic, my threshold for when to deploy the National Guard is very, very high. And so in the scenario that you outlined, I would not be in favor of deploying the National Guard. Every time we take a Guard member to deploy, they are taken away from a job that they are doing, sometimes in other critical industries in Maine, in healthcare, et cetera. And so my threshold for deploying the National Guard is quite high. And so in the scenario that you described, although the need to continue weatherizing, especially in low-income houses, is as pressing as it could be, for me, it does not meet a very high threshold for when to deploy the National Guard.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Vaughn Woodruff. And Vaughn, if you could introduce yourself. You have an interesting background. Can you say briefly where you're coming from and state your question? There you go, Vaughn.
I'm on now. Dr. Shah, pleasure to meet you. Vaughn Woodruff. I'm based in Pittsfield, Maine. Really appreciate your leadership. You stepped into a rough time in Maine during the pandemic and appreciate all the work you did there. I served on the governor's Economic Recovery Committee during that time, former founder and CEO of a solar company here in Maine. I've been executive and for the last couple of years have worked on national issues related to interconnecting solar energy storage and EVs to the grid. So I have kind of a nuanced question that's about energy policy, but more broadly. So one of the things that I've noticed in myself is that the less time I'm focused on my work in Maine, the longer it takes for me to get caught up. So just 2 years away took a lot for me to get caught back up on what's happened with solar in Maine, even though I was watching it a bit. And the more that I'm in rooms like governor's recovery committees, I'm also the chair of the state workforce board, and less in the living rooms of former customers, the less of a feel I have on the ground for what's going on in Maine and what's needed. And so I think one of the huge benefits that you bring is a lot of years of experience outside of Maine, because I think we often need that different perspective to be brought. And I also think that means it's going to be the flip side of that, some gaps potentially on all of the geographies of Maine and all the economic strata of Maine, and just like the histories that have landed us with the problems that we have today. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you see yourself kind of filling in those gaps in leadership if you're elected governor?
Yeah, thanks, Vaughn. No, that's a great question. And I think you're right. Every leader brings different backgrounds to the experience of the organization they are leading. As you noted, I've led very large organizations, 2 large state health departments in 2 states. I was the number 2 official at the U.S. CDC, which is roughly the same number of employees, at least when I was there, as the state of Maine, and about twice the budget of the state of Maine. But as a trade-off, perhaps not the depth here. Although, I'd say, Vaughn, one of the interesting aspects of being part of the pandemic response in Maine was that I had to learn just about how dozens of industries across the state function on a day-to-day basis, so that we could help craft best practices for those industries. And so I had to go in deep about the way in which EIW engages in their shipbuilding, the way in which a lot of aspects of the agriculture industry, whether it's blueberries or other crops, are harvested, the ways in which lobstering are done, to say nothing of healthcare and others. So I did have to go really deep into all of that in order to, again, craft nuanced policies that balanced all these things. Likewise, it's all well and good to just try to do that from the office, but there's no substitute to actually being out there. And so another part of what I prioritized when I was at Maine CDC was getting out there. If there was a vaccine clinic happening, there's a pretty good chance that I was there, no matter where in the state it was, at least for part of the time. All that said, there's a lot more to be done. And so one of the benefits one of the benefits of being on the campaign trail has been the opportunity to engage with people across the state on dozens and dozens of issues. For example, the energy markets. Again, even though I worked as an attorney focusing on regulated industries and their appellate issues, don't hold myself out as an expert in this whatsoever. I've got a lot more to learn, and I've had the privilege to do so as part of the campaign process. That lays a good foundation and has created a lot of the contacts of folks that I'm going to need if I'm successful in this venture. And so is the job done, Vaughn? Not even close. It is just getting started. But the approach that I've taken this far: show up, ask tough questions, make sure I understand what's being proposed and said. That's how I've gone about it before, and that's how I'm going to go about doing it again as governor. Oh, Seth, I can't hear you either.
I'm sorry, I've had audio issues, and I keep with this new system, I've had to use my phone, so I'm having a little difficulty getting used to that. I do apologize. Data centers, just quickly, you responded to our survey question about data centers, said that you would have signed the moratorium proposal, LD 307. Dr. Shah, you also said that you would support higher standards for data centers before they were allowed at all in the state, and those specifics are at our website. Any other thoughts about data centers that you want to share with Amy?
Yeah, and Seth, one modification. I mean, I wrote what I wrote, but so I stand by that. But just as you noted it, I mean, I in my head right now, the question is more of an if we are to embrace data centers in Maine if 20 megawatts are over, not when. It is still an if in my mind. And as a regulatory matter, my approach is it is better to have a regulatory architecture in place a priori rather than after the industry has already set up. Regulation after the fact, exceedingly messy. It's pushing a boulder up a mountain from a legal perspective because of various vested rights and such. So my approach to these things is get it done right rather than just do it fast. And that is how I think of data centers, as well as a host of other regulated issues, regulated entities. I am not convinced that data centers are part of Maine's economic future. They don't yield much in the way of employment, although they do seem to generate a lot of revenue for local public for the local public fisc. But net of net, it's not clear that they have a role here. So I'm not rushing to the gates on them. I want to make sure, if we are going to have them, a big if, that we have regulatory architecture in place first.
Fantastic.
I will say, just in closing, there are some exciting ideas, and I want to just characterize them as ideas, but around the role of clean energy and ways in which, again, if then we could put nation leading provisions in place that could totally help build out more of our clean energy. But again, my skepticism level is exceedingly high. We are in a world where a lot of people, including data center developers, say that we can eat cake and lose weight, and my skepticism is very high.
Dr. Shah, we are so grateful for your time with us today. Unfortunately, that is all the time that you have, so we want to honor your schedule and let you go. I do want to encourage people to read Dr. Shah's full response to our survey and all of the other candidates' answers as well at ourpowermaine.org. You can also watch the recordings of these Power Lunch videos at the same website. And don't forget, next Tuesday is not just the election, it's also the first public witness hearing in CMP's rate hike request case. You can learn more about that at the tiny URL, at tinyurl.com, no CMP hike, to learn more about that and how to help out with that resistance movement. Dr. Shah, again, many thanks and good luck next Tuesday.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.